We'll kick things off with Kate Graham from the City of London. She's the manager of corporate initiatives, and she will be speaking about creating public value.
First off, thank you very much for the opportunity and the invitation to join you over lunch today. I have to confess something right off the top, which is that I am not a finance person. You are all actually quite intimidating to me in that way, because it's a whole world that I don't understand. So this will be a non-finance content presentation, which will either be irritatingly rudimentary or maybe refreshing. I don't know. I'm kind of hoping it's the latter, so you'll have to bear with me a bit. So what I wanted to talk about in the time that we've got the next few minutes is something that it sounds really basic, but it's one of those things that the more you think about it, the more complicated it becomes. And it's this idea of value in public services, value in the services we all provide. So by nature of being in this room, I suspect that myself and all of you, we spend some portion of our lives trying to show that municipal services are valued. And that can be through budgets and through annual reports, through KPIs, through all kinds of other things. And we try to communicate to the public that what we do matters. And what my personal view on this is that it is a seriously uphill battle. And I'm not sure if others feel that same way, but even though we put a lot of effort into this, it is incredibly difficult. And there's some obvious reasons for that. These won't be surprises to any of you, but I think that they're worth mentioning. One is that a lot of what we do is totally invisible to the public. They don't see it. They don't appreciate it there. It's what we call a hygiene factor, which means you only notice it if it's bad. The public doesn't even appreciate this. We're not even, it's an irritant to them. It delays their commute to work. So not only do they don't appreciate it, but they, in some ways, kind of resent some of the things that we do. So that's a big problem if we're trying to communicate value. The other big problem is that a lot of what we do doesn't make any financial sense at all. The costs are increasing exponentially. In some cases where there's decreased demand, other times there's hugely exploding demand. That's a very different kind of problem. But from a conventional business logic sense, what we do often doesn't make any sense at all. So that's very difficult. And yet we know that these services are the core of what we do. They're vitally important. And so it creates a challenge for us to show that what we do matters to them. So those are two problems. The third, to me, though, is by far the biggest. And this is one of those things that, when you see a piece of data or a piece of information that just jumps off the page, it gets in your head, it really bothers you. For me, this was one of those things. And it happened when we went out to the public to ask them a little bit. We do annual surveys in London. How do you find the quality of life in London? Where should we be spending your tax dollars? Things like that. And in 2012, when we did this survey, we went out to the public and we asked a new question that year, and it was, have you used a City of London service within the last year? And we know that the answer should be 100% yes. People have probably used a City of London service within the last hour if they've driven on the streets or used water, used transit, thrown something in the garbage. People are using City of London services all the time. But when we asked them this question, what we found was that only about half of the people in our city recognized that they had used a city service in the last year. So that's a problem. That's a big problem, because if they don't appreciate and recognize that they're getting services, no wonder when they get that tax bill in the mail, they don't see any value for it because they don't know what they get. So we went out and we did this question in 2012, and then we did a bit of an experiment, where in 2013 we said, let's ask the same question, same survey company, same methodology, same time of year, everything's the same, but we're just going to change one thing. And that one thing was, right before we asked this question, we had people responding to the survey go through a list of about 35 city services and tell us if they would like to spend more or less. So water, roads, and parks and reuse, and childcare, and so on. So those services are fresh in their mind, and then we ask them the same question, have you used a City of London service in the last year? And here were the results. So we see about a 17% increase on the yes side, but even after thinking through 35 services, we still have about a third of the people in our community that didn't identify that they had used any services we provide. So to me, this is not only a big problem, but it's kind of the heart of the challenge that we have. as people who try to communicate value in our services. Because on the surface, this is a problem of communication and awareness. We need to do a better job of talking about what we do, and I get all that. But I think on a much deeper level, what this is pointing to is a problem of relevance. Because this is telling us that 1/3 of people in our community don't see any connection between what we do and their day-to-day lives. So again, for those of us in this room who spend a portion of our lives trying to talk about value, this is the heart of the struggle that we have in my personal view. So this all sounds very dark and gloomy, and oh my gosh, what are we going to do about it? And the good news is, I'm holding my slides. The secondary piece of that survey was we also asked people about satisfaction with local government, and again, this is not a London problem. This is a problem that's consistent across lots of municipalities, and in fact, all over the Western world, where we see that satisfaction is not high and not getting higher. And I think it's directly connected to the slides before. So, what do we do about it? But I think that there are some very simple things that we can start doing. These are things that I'm very lucky in my job. I get to play around a lot, experiment, be curious. And so there's a few things that we're trying that are yielding some results that I want to share with you. And I think these are opportunities for us to ensure that what we do is directly connected to people in our community and what they're expecting from us. So 3 simple ideas I want to share with you. The first one is that people are talking about local government all the time. And if you start listening for it, you probably already know this. They sit in coffee shops, they sit around dinner tables. People are always talking about the place where they live, what they would like to see there, what they don't like about the place they live, and things like that. What's different today than in the past is that social media has exploded within the last 10 years. And now those conversations are increasingly happening online, and they're very easy to listen in on. And there's lots of social media platforms. My personal favorite is Twitter. We know in London that there are about 30,000 tweets every single month about the City of London. So this is free data every single day. That's a larger sample size than even when we go out and pay for surveys. It's a huge number of people that are talking about what they like in the city, what they don't like. During council meetings, they're providing feedback on what they think about what's being debated on the council floor. And we just have to be curious enough to listen in on the discussions. So we've started using some free tools. There's tons of these out there. I'm not here to push any particular product, but tools that allow you to aggregate that data and get some logic and some sense out of it. So this, for example, is a little cloud that shows, there's a closer up version of the kinds of things people are talking about. See that connected to the topic of London, people are talking about police, talking about traffic, Middlesex County, a variety of other things. And this changes every day. So when you log on, you can read it kind of like the newspaper, just to see what sorts of things people are talking about. The other thing that is really powerful about Twitter is that when people are communicating on Twitter, depending on what device they're using, it's tagged. So this was a shot of about 6 days of data of where people were talking about the City of London. And you can see that there are almost 370 locations around the world where within a 6-day period, people were talking about London. So that's useful. You can take a look and see who's talking about what kinds of things. You can zoom in and see it on a regional level. Or what I think is most useful is to be able to look at it within the community. Because this gives us live data to see if, a particular issue, if the entire city is talking about it, or maybe people just within one neighborhood. When there's something on the council floor, we can see what kinds or what areas of people are interested in participating in that dialogue. So it can be enormously useful for building real-time intelligence about issues without having to go out and pay for survey data and do things like that. So I think social media, we're just at the very beginning of this, but it presents a real opportunity if we want to show value in our services, to go listening into the public about what they're saying about them, because the fact is they're talking about them all the time. Second idea, this is one that I'm really keen about, and again, I think we're just at the very beginning of it. The private sector has paid close attention to our behavior as consumers, and you all probably know this. Like rewards companies, for example, they collect tons and tons of data about what we buy, where we buy it, how we buy it, and they sell that to people who are trying to sell us things. And there's a lot of insight that can come from data about how consumers behave. And the reality is that in government, we have all that data too. We have lots and lots of data about who's using our services, how, when, where. But I don't think that we have fully leveraged the potential of trying to build insights into that so that we can tailor what we do to the people that we serve. So we've just started doing some work with a company called Environics. Again, not trying to push them, there are others that do this work too. What Environics has done is they have taken the entire Canadian population, divided it into 66 segments. And these segments have similar demographic features and they have similar values that causes them to behave in similar ways. And so we took the City of London data and we dumped it into the system and said, tell us a little bit more about our community, what segments, where they live. This is a high-level map, but we can drill down a lot further. And the interesting thing about this is when we started then putting in data from our specific services, so people who have a library card, or people who are using parks and recreation services. The interesting thing is that often, and actually in all cases, there were certain segments that were much more likely to want to use our services. And that sort of changed my thinking, because we like to think that public services are for everybody. The whole community is equally likely to go to a park or use an arena or need police services or whatever. And I've yet to find an example where that was actually the case. So to give you one example, we took data on all of the fires that had happened in London over a 5-year period and put it into the system. And I appreciate this is a horribly confusing chart. If you just pay attention to the index on the side, what this shows is how likely those segments are to have a fire. And what this tells you is that there's one segment in London that is more than 300 times more likely than the average to have a fire. And there are a whole bunch of segments that are extremely unlikely to have a fire to the point where they have never had a fire. So this information becomes incredibly useful for people who are delivering fire prevention services and other things, because we can find out lots more about these segments. We can find out how they get their information, where they tend to live, age of families, language scope, and all kinds of other things. And again, this was not an expensive tool. I think the city, in full disclosure, we paid just a few $1,000s to have access to this system, and we do it all on our own in terms of putting in the data. But it gives us some really real-time insights about people using our services, again, so that we can tailor how we're providing them to the people that actually need them. It's a really powerful tool, and again, I think we're just at the start of using big data in a variety of interesting ways. The third idea is another one that we're just at the beginning of in London, and probably some of you are much further along than we are, but we're just at the start. And it's the idea that as local governments in Ontario, most municipalities employ about 1% to 2% of their population. So that is a huge penetration rate that would be unheard of in a lot of other sectors. Because each of your employees, they have neighbors and they're on soccer teams and they go to fundraisers and barbecues and all kinds of other things. And so probably within your corporation, within your team of colleagues, you know most people in your community in some way. And I have a theory, I don't have any data on this, but a theory that what people think about their municipality, the place they live, is heavily influenced by whatever city employee they know best. So when they're out at a soccer game or whatever with that person, and if they say, I'm sitting in my truck or I'm sitting at my desk all day and I have nothing to do, or they're saying, there's something on, we talked about a council, I don't know anything about that, that has a major impact on how other people view the organization. I think in a very profound way. And so thinking about employees in terms of their importance as being faces of the public service, faces of your organization everywhere they go, and making sure that employees appreciate how important they are, and that part of the responsibility of being a public servant is being that face of the public service. It doesn't end at 4:30, it's all the time. But making sure that they know that is really important, again, way that we can reach out to the public in sort of an unconventional way. So in closing, I guess the main point here is that even though myself and probably all of you, we spend a lot of energy trying to show value and talk about how our services are very efficient and effective and we're doing a great job. But if we think that value starts with us, we're probably missing the point. Because value really starts with the people that we serve. They are complicated, they change often, they sometimes have conflicting and competing needs. And the job is for us to make sure that we are listening and paying attention and doing everything that we can to stay attuned to what they're looking for and then build value in that way, rather than trying to produce it from where we are at our desks. So, in closing, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you about a few of these things. These are just 3 ideas of things that we're working on in London. I'm sure each of you are working on a whole bunch of things that would be useful for us too, so I'd love to hear about them after if you're willing to share. And that's all. Thank you very much.